Hi folks, my name's Matt Preston and I'll be marking your essays for this subject. So what I thought I'd do is I'd make a video of exactly how to get good marks from me. Okay, and it can be a little bit involved, so I thought I'd make a video so that you can replay it when you get to writing your essays, and you can pull it apart and make sure your essays line up with what's expected. Okay. So what I'm going to do is run you through a series of PowerPoints, and that'll explain exactly how to get good marks from me for this subject. Okay, so this is my expectations in particular for this topic's essays, right? And so we're going to talk about structure and evidence, mainly structure, but before I do, there's a couple of things I need to run through. The first is plagiarism, right? Copying other people's work, copying things from the internet, cutting and pasting. You cannot get away with that now, right? Everything you hand up will be put through a search program called Turnitin automatically, and that compares every sentence that you've got in your essay and does a Google search of them, right? So if there's anything that matches on the internet, it then presents me with a report of your entire essay with everything that you've cut and pasted from the internet highlighted, right? And then it tells me where it's from, where you've taken it from. So you'll see here on the left, it says 79% of this essay has been copied from the internet, and it tells me exactly where from, what websites. So number one, 75% of it has been copied from a website called keia.org, and then on the right it highlights every sentence that's been taken from each website, right? So I'm pleading with you, please do not copy anyone's work, right? If it's been handed up before, then it'll find it. If it's on the internet, it'll find it. If you buy an essay from these online websites, they cut and paste everything, right? And so we'll find it. If you do this, you will be penalized, right? You'll have to repeat the subject. If you do it twice, you'll get thrown out of the degree. So please don't do it, okay? You can't get away with it now. Okay. Now, onto referencing. Now, I don't care what particular style you use, Oxford or Chicago or Harvard, as long as it's consistent within each essay, okay, and error-free, right? However, that being said, I personally think that Oxford referencing style is the best. Okay, it's the easiest to read, and you can put information in the footnotes that helps your essay be readable. Okay, so Oxford style is footnotes in the body of the essay, and then a bibliography. Right. So if you want a good style guide for that, something that's really quite simple and easy to follow, then there's a link here to the one at Deakin University. I've found that's quite good. So have a look at that. Also, when it comes to referencing, you should put in the time to learn a program called EndNote. You can download it for free from the Flinders Library website, and that program, EndNote, instead of having to type out all the little bits that all the semicolons and the quotation marks and to have it in the right order and that sort of thing. All the things that you will make a mistake on because they're all very fiddly. What EndNote does is it just gives you fields for the author,
the journal, the name of the article, etc., etc. Right? And so you just fill them in and press enter, and it does all the rest for you, and it creates a bibliography for you. Plus, you only need to type it out once, and then every second, third, fourth, 10th time that you use that reference, you can just do a shortcut and bang, it's there, right? So it saves you so much time and it stops errors. So I definitely recommend you putting in the little bit of time that it takes to learn EndNote. You'll be able to, and you can just go online and find guides to how to use EndNote, right? Wikipedia, or all these sites, or EndNote itself has a good instruction booklet. So I highly recommend you invest the time for that. It'll save you a lot of time later on. Okay, now before we get into the nitty-gritty of what structure I expect, I need to make you aware that there is two basic essay structures in the social sciences, okay? So those two basic structures are qualitative and quantitative, right? So quantitative is really all the evidence you're using is completely sort of focused on statistical correlation or other sort of statistical tests. And so for that, I would expect you to use, or it is expected that you would use the outline on the right. So an abstract, an intro, an essay plan, a literature review, then you'd have a discussion about what methodology you've used and why, and then you'd have your data analysis and then discussion and recommendations, right? But in international relations in general, quantitative is not the main way we do research. So there is quite a bit, but and at least in our course, we wouldn't expect you to do quantitative. But if you do, and that's okay, you would use that essay structure, right? But the more normal essays that we get are qualitative, right? So the evidence that you use is case studies and examples, right? Quotes, things like that, right? So here we have the general outline of a qualitative essay for international relations, right? So you'd have an abstract, an introduction that includes an essay plan. Then you'd have a literature review, and then you would have the body of your essay would be either separate case studies or maybe themes with examples of each, right? And then you would have a conclusion. So that's the two general formats. I'm going to concentrate on qualitative because that is by far the most common that we use. Okay, and before I get into the nitty-gritty of a qualitative essay structure, the first step is making sure you've got a good essay question, right, or a good essay title. Okay, and there's two very easy tricks for making sure you've got a good essay question. So the first one is that, both of these tricks. The first one is to make sure it is a question that is that has an answer that is yes or no, right? A question that is in a yes or no format. And that will mean that it forces you, it ensures that your essay builds to a conclusion, a firm yes or no conclusion. And it'll just guide you to that norm, very easily. So make sure it's a yes or no question, or you make the title of your essay a specific conclusion. So it is a thesis statement. Okay. So for a yes or no question, an example might be, did the USSR's declaration of war against Imperial Japan trigger their surrender? Right? So that's a yes or no. Or, I mean, you might have some some vagueness in there, but it will generally force you into presenting evidence for the yes case or the no case, okay? And or otherwise you'll use a specific conclusion as your thesis title, right? So it's a thesis statement. So the example there might be the USSR's declaration of war against Japan was the trigger for their surrender. Right? So that's an actual conclusion that you will quite naturally then present evidence for why it's true, right? Why the reader will believe that it's true. That's so crucial. What you don't want to do, right? What you don't want to do is have just a vague topic as your essay question or title, right? So something like the Asian financial crisis, because it doesn't help the reader know what you're going to say about it, right? You could say anything about that. And more importantly, it doesn't sort of help you come to a firm conclusion. You'll end up writing this sort of pointless, aimless essay. And the other thing you don't want to do, which is quite common, is people title their essay as research on the Asian financial crisis, or analysis of the Asian financial crisis, or an examination of the crisis, right? That's still a vague topic that doesn't help the reader know what your conclusion is. Don't tell me that you're going to do research. Tell me the conclusion of your research, right? Tell me, exactly what this essay is about, right? So loose lending regulations caused the Asian financial crisis, right? Like that's a firm conclusion, right? Or what caused the Asian financial crisis, right? That's better, but you'd still want to get into a yes or no, I think. But anyway, so that's a very easy trick to make sure that you end up with an essay that has a point, okay? Okay. Now, onto the nitty-gritty. What are the markers looking for, or what am I looking for? So what you get marks for, and probably in a 50-50 ratio, is structure first. Do you have a clear, well-structured and easy to follow argument? And I'll spend the rest of this little video explaining how you do that, right? But that's probably, if you don't have a clear structure, then your marks will be limited to a pass, right? Secondly, the other 50% of your mark will come from how good your evidence is, right? So how well have you supported the conclusion with evidence? So have you got a detailed case study, or have you got lots of less detailed but still fairly convincing examples? And have you got quotes from experts and statistics and just a strong chain of logic, right? So is it convincing? Have you supported your conclusion well, right? Have you argued your case well with evidence? So they're the two things, right? Structure and evidence. Okay, so let's move on to structure. There is an expected format for the structure of your essay, right? And if you don't follow it, then if your writing is exceptionally fantastic, then it might not matter. But I rarely see that, right? Like maybe 1 in 500 essays doesn't follow the structure and still works well, right? It's extremely risky to not follow the standard academic format, right? And also because the marker is expecting it. If you do something else, it's kind of distracting from the case you're building, right? Like academic writing has an expected sort of structure that you should follow. So what is that structure? Well, for honours, masters and PhD theses, or a journal article, this is the structure. You have an abstract, you have an introduction,
You have a thesis statement and an essay plan as part of that introduction. You would have a literature review, and then you would have the body of your essay where you present your evidence, right? So either case studies or themes with examples, and then you have a conclusion, right? Now, what's the purpose? What is the purpose of each of these sections, right? Now, for a short essay, these are going to be subtitles, or if you're writing your thesis, that they'll be chapters, right? So what is the purpose of each of these sections, right? So firstly, the abstract is a paragraph, right? Just one paragraph. It's not, a whole page or 2 pages or 3 pages. It is a couple of hundred words that says what is the conclusion and what is the kind of evidence that you have to support it. Right? Very short, and it's about the conclusion and evidence. Right? Then, what is the introduction? What is the purpose of the introduction? Well, the purpose of that is to state what is the problem that you're going to solve, and if it's not obvious, then explain why it's not trivial. Right? Academia is trying to not waste its time on trivial problems, right? So you have an introduction sentence or chapter, right? But in an essay, you'll normally just have an introduction sentence or 2 that introduces the problem and sort of shows why it's important, right? Then you'll have a thesis statement that is a single sentence stating the argument you'll make, right? So that's the conclusion that the essay will reach. And I tend to like students starting that sentence with the phrase, this essay will argue, and then finish that sentence, right? Because then it's a clear signal that this is the thesis statement, right? If you use any other sort of phrasing, it's easy for it to get lost, right? So I would highly recommend you use this essay will argue, and then finish the sentence for your thesis statement. And then you would follow it up with an essay plan, right? So this essay will argue and it will do so by presenting the following supporting evidence. Firstly, secondly, thirdly, fourthly, right? And that's your introduction. An introduction really has those 3 elements, or it should have. An introduction has an introduction sentence saying what is the problem and why it's important, a thesis statement in 1 sentence, and an essay plan. Those 3 things make up the introduction. Then, in your essay plan, I'll talk about it more in detail in the next slide, but the essay plan is a roadmap for your reader, right? And you want to say what are your arguments, right? So what is your list of conclusions that build up to believing the overall conclusion, right? What you don't want is topics, right? Vague topics. So like something like, firstly, I will examine money, and secondly, I will examine emotion, and thirdly, I will examine, soccer or something. They're just broad topics that don't help the reader know what you're going to say about them, right? So each subtitle, each part of your essay plan should be a conclusion, right? Okay, so then the literature review, and literature review is not an annotated bibliography where you just summarize what other people have said, right? What a literature review is supposed to do is you are going to use the literature to make the case for why your thesis is necessary, right? So you'll list off the important articles in the topic, right? And then you'll finish each little paragraph with, but so and so didn't do this, and I will fill that gap, right? But this paper will do that, right? So
you're using the literature to make a case for why your article is necessary and is not repeating what everyone else has done. And then you'll have the body of your essay, right? And I insist on subtitles, right? I mean, previous generations maybe thought that subtitles were like cheating, and that you should be able to write an essay that is easy to follow without subtitles. That might be true, but I think newer generations are trying to use every trick in the book they can to make essays easier to read, right? So I really insist on subtitles, and subtitles should be conclusions, not vague topics. Okay, so and then the conclusion, right? So you're going to wrap it up with a little summary of what evidence you've presented, and finish with a kapow sort of this is my conclusion and this is why it's important, right? Wrap it up nicely with a little bow. Okay, so that was the whole structure if you're going to write your thesis, right? But for normal essays that aren't your end thesis for your honours or your masters or your PhD, so for normal essays that you're going to do, there is a shortened structure. So what we do is we don't expect you to do an abstract, and we don't want you to do a literature review, because we're more interested in the evidence and your argument. We haven't got enough word count for you to spend 2,000 words on a literature review, right? So it'll be fairly uncommon for you to need to do a literature review, and I'm assuming, check with the lecturer, but you don't have to do a literature review for this essay, and you don't need to do an abstract, right? Okay, so the structure for a normal essay, right, in undergraduate and for your master's coursework, right? Everything except a thesis. Intro with a thesis statement and an essay plan, and the body of your essay with subtitles and a conclusion, okay? Now, this is an example of a really good introduction, right? And so remember that an introduction includes an introduction sentence, a thesis statement, and an essay plan. Those three things, right? So when I say a good introduction, it has to have those three things. So the question is, has the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty worked, right? So that's a yes or no question, so really good. So it's already focused, and that question already tells the reader you're going to argue it one way or the other, right? So this is the introduction paragraph, right? Pause the video here and have a quick read through that and see if you can pick out what is the intro, what is the thesis statement, and what is the essay plan. Okay, so you've read through that? Okay, so obviously the thesis the introduction sentence is a recent test. The recent test of a nuclear weapon by North Korea has caused some to argue that the Non-Proliferation Treaty has been a failure. Right? So that's introduced the problem, and it's even introduced three straw men that we can fight, argue against. Right? And then, despite the outlier of North Korea, this essay will argue that the NPT has worked. Right? So intro sentence and then the thesis statement. Already, the marker knows exactly what you're going to argue in this essay. Right? You're already, collecting marks, right? And then the essay plan, right? Firstly, secondly, thirdly, finally, right? This is the template that you should use. This is a really good introduction paragraph that I really recommend you sort of use. Okay. Okay, so here I've shrunk the introduction paragraph down, right? But it's still the same one. And I want to focus on how to write good subtitles. Okay, so sometimes I tell people you've got to write an essay plan, and they write an essay plan, but it doesn't correspond in any way to the subtitles or the text in the body, right? So the essay plan has to correspond exactly with your subtitles and what happens in the body of your essay. And to make it especially clear for the writer, for the reader and the marker, you should try and use very closely worded subtitles to the words in your essay plan, right? So you'll see for each of these subtitles, they're very close to the wording used in the essay plan, right? So the first one is the essay plan says, while the MPT has not stopped proliferation, it has slowed it. And the first subtitle is not stopped but slowed, right? And then secondly is actually word for word. It has enabled the spread of nuclear power while blocking the spread of nuclear weapons. So the second subtitle is enabled the spread of nuclear power without spreading nuclear weapons, right? Etc., etc. So make sure they're very closely linked, right? Plus, titles and subtitles, right? So the titles of your essay and the subtitles should always be either questions that imply what you're going to argue in the section below it, or little conclusions, right? They're little thesis statements, right? So each of these is a conclusion, so the reader knows exactly what you're going to be arguing for, right? So not stopped but slowed, or enabled the spread of nuclear power without spreading nuclear weapons, or controlled the security dilemma, right? These are not vague topics, right? They're not, you know, money or emotions or you know, just these vague topics that don't tell the reader actually what you're going to argue, right? So that's subtitles. Now, that's pretty well it for your normal essay, right? But I will include in this just a little note on literature reviews for those that are going to go on to do a thesis. Okay, just one slide, I think. So the literature review, it's not an annotated bibliography where you just summarize everyone's work, right? What you do is you use the other people's writing, right? You use the summary to then make an argument about how it's lacking and how you're going to fulfill that lack, right? Why there's a gap in the knowledge and that's the reason why your article is necessary, right? So pause the video and have a quick read of these two paragraphs here. Okay, so you can see how, so for an article you'd have a fairly brief literature review, right? Just a couple of paragraphs maybe. Or if you're doing a thesis, it's going to be a whole chapter. But the key part of a literature review is this sentence at the end of each paragraph where you link it in and make the argument to why your thesis is necessary and is not just rehashing what everyone else has done, right? So the key sentences here are, however, Jones does not take into consideration key cases where the nuclear weapons program has been abandoned, right? So the implication is that you will do that. And then the next paragraph is, however, these arguments fail to acknowledge that the NPT's inspection program has allowed all but the most aggressive and rogue states to use nuclear power for electricity while holding in check the security dilemma. This article presents a more complete picture of the performance of the NPT than has been previously done, right? So you see how it's not just summarising other people's ideas. It's using them to make the argument for why your article or thesis fills a gap in the knowledge. Right? Okay, and so I'll end with just a word on grammar. Grammar is very important, right? Like, you won't lose marks for one or two, typos or poorly constructed sentences, but more than a few, and it's going to start costing you marks, right? And it can cost you a lot of marks, right? It can limit your essay to a pass only if the grammar is too bad. Okay. Cool. All right. I wish you all the very best with your study and writing, and I look forward to reading your essays.